Hello and welcome. In this recording, I'm going to go over qualitative data analysis with you. So this is a follow-on from the presentation on quantitative data analysis. You'll notice an arc that both presentations are together in one slideshow for the actual slides, but I've separated the recordings. Okay, so this is coming from Learning Unit 5, Theme 2 specifically, and this is Chapter 16 in your textbook. So as always, I want to start it helps to frame what we're going to cover in this lecture, in this recording. So here it is. Here's one of the possible questions you could get in the exam on Saturday. So DeVos, Stratum, Fouché, and Delport describe qualitative data analysis as the process of bringing order, structure, and meaning to the mass of data. So your job is to explain the nature of qualitative data analysis and interpretation for 15 months. So let's dive into it. If you have a look at the learning outcomes in this theme, these are the ones that are listed on ARC and in your module outline. The first one discusses the nature of qualitative data analysis and interpretation. That obviously speaks directly to this research question. Okay. There are some other bits and pieces for qualitative analysis, which we will go over because it's good for you to have this kind of exposure. These are things that you need to know anyway. But the exam question is going to focus specifically on learning outcomes. Okay, but we will look at qualitative data analysis as a whole. We'll look at some different methods. We're not going to do too much coding. I'll just show you what codes look like so you know. Okay, so we've done a session on qualitative data collection, and you might remember that you could collect qualitative data with interviews or focus groups or observations or even questionnaires, open-ended questionnaires. Let's say that you have conducted 20 interviews. Great. Now what? So now, as a researcher, you need to make sense of this large volume of data that you have. Think about if you did 20 interviews and each interview was an hour long. Think about how long those transcripts would be. And a transcript, if you're not familiar with the term, is when you convert the audio into text. So you could do it old school way by pausing and playing and pausing and playing and then typing out what everyone said. But there are lots of AI tools that can transcribe for you now. And Teams is one of them, luckily. Now you've got pages and pages and pages and pages of interview transcripts. What do you do with it? Now you've got to make sense of it somehow. So you could either have pages and pages of transcripts, you could have observation notes. If you did observations, you could have a bunch of documents that you have sourced that you now need to analyze, or survey responses if it was an open-ended questionnaire. But let's go with the interview example. So what would I have to do now with these transcripts? How am I going to analyze it? Well, whichever analysis method you choose, it's going to follow the same process. So you would need to organize your data. Just one moment, I just want to check. Okay. You would need to organize your data somehow. And depending what kind of analysis you were doing would dictate how you organize those data. So one way is separate folders for each transcription that you have for each participant so you don't get them mixed up. You can also then number the lines. That becomes quite useful when you are coding and then drawing on extracts from the text in order to support an argument that you've made. So that's one way you can organize the data. Then again, regardless of which analysis method you choose, all of them will involve, in some way or another, identifying patterns and themes within those data. And that's how you organize it, essentially. And then you bring your lens, your researcher layer on top of that, and you interpret meaning in the data, which is why it is useless to talk about objectivity in qualitative research. You cannot be objective when you are bringing your lens and you are interpreting those data. Yes, we use pre-established theoretical frameworks if you're doing a deductive analysis to help us to know what to look for in the data. But there's still a good chance that if you and I use the same theoretical framework to analyze the same transcript, we may still have slightly different interpretations. And it's the strength and quality of the argument that determines how good a qualitative data analysis is and the way in which you apply theory. Okay. So regardless of which one you choose, the goal is to understand experiences, perspectives, and meanings. You're not just summarizing what people have said. That's not what a qualitative data analysis is. Then you're just presenting raw data. Your job as a qualitative data analyst is to take those raw data that you've got, and by raw data, I mean the interview transcripts, for example, and to make some sort of meaning out of it. What are the experiences? What are the perspectives? What meanings do people glean from their own experiences? So all qualitative analyses, there's quite a few different types, and I'll show you a few examples just now, but all of them will do these things. They are all interpretive, which means that you as the researcher interprets the meaning behind participants' words. Remember what I just said in the previous slide. You don't just summarize what people have said. What is the meaning behind their words? And can you back that up? Can you prove that that was really the meaning? Prove in inverted commas, because we don't prove anything in qualitative analysis. All qualitative analysis is iterative, which means that analysis is happening continuously through the research process. Whether you like it or not, the analysis process actually starts during the interview. You won't be able to turn your brain off. Your brain is going to start looking for themes and patterns, and you're going to see consistencies and frequencies and things coming out in the interviews already. And that's fun. That is part of the analysis. Yeah. All qualitative analyses are also flexible and contextual. So that means that researchers can refine codes and themes as new insights emerge. It's not as hard and fixed as a quantitative analysis would be. And researchers can also then interpret findings in the context of participants' experiences. Okay. So again, although the approaches differ slightly, whether you're doing a narrative approach or a discourse analysis or a psychosocial analysis, thematic analysis, grounded theory, I'll show you some examples in a moment. They all share a relatively similar structure. For all of them, you would have to prepare the data in some way. So that means transcribing your interviews and organizing your notes. You would have to read and reread and reread your data to really become familiar with the content. All forms of data analysis, qualitative data analysis, would also require you to code the data. Now, when we talk about coding the data, one of the ways that you do it is you can go line by line in your transcript now, read what your participants have said. Go line by line and you label meaningful segments of text with just short little labels. And those codes you would then eventually group together to identify themes. Now, the way that you group those together would depend on the kind of analysis you're doing, because the kind of analysis you're doing will guide what you are looking for and your analytical questions that you would ask of your data. And then, of course, very importantly, you would end off with interpreting your findings, which is where you would spend a bit of time explaining whatever patterns you have found in the data set, and then you would go ahead and answer your research questions. So here's some examples of codes. So let's say that this is a line from your interview transcript. Sure, I usually start my day by checking emails. The code there could just be checking emails. Okay. After that, I have a team meeting where we discuss our goals for the day. Code there, attending team meeting. You're capturing the essence of what the participant has said. You're not in a code, you're not doing any interpretation. In a code, you are simply extracting what is the meaning that comes out of this little extract of text. Because what I will then do is I will ignore my interview extract and I will eventually just look at my codes and I will group similar codes together to form themes. And my themes are essentially answers to my research questions. So another way to think of it, your extracts, your raw data, all the stuff on the left, this is raw data. This is the stuff you would use to make bricks. I don't know how you make bricks. Whatever goes into a brick to make a brick, that is the raw data. Okay? You take that raw data and you can turn it into a code. You can turn that raw material into a brick. I'm assuming it's some sort of stone and water and something else, probably. Your codes are your bricks for your house that you're building. Yeah? You put your codes together in a particular way. You put your bricks together in a particular way to build a wall or a theme. Once you have enough themes structured in a particular way, your themes can hold up your roof. And your roof is your interpretations that then answer your research question. Okay, to make you a pretty little house of a data analysis of your findings. So here are some of the most popular qualitative data analysis methods. At this stage, you don't have to know these in too much detail, but I'll walk you through them anyway. So we'll start in the top left-hand corner, a qualitative content analysis. This is a good place to start because we have looked at an example of a qualitative content analysis as a data collection method. Now let's follow on and see how you would analyze it using content analysis. Worth noting, you can't say I'm using content analysis to collect my data and then do a discourse analysis to analyze those data. Okay, if you're going to collect data using content analysis, you must analyze it using content analysis as well. So content analysis will identify patterns in texts or images or videos. You can group data into codes and categories for analysis. So by the way, this is another lovely way to analyze photos. I spoke in one of our recordings or live sessions about photo voice as a form of data collection. And this is a great way to analyze those photos. Having a look at photos that look similar or that seem to have similar meanings or themes. So qualitative content analysis can help measure concept frequency in qualitative research, but it can be very time consuming. And you can with qualitative content analysis lose the nuances and the context in communication. So it's not my favorite one to use, especially for analyzing interviews. Of course, they all have their strengths and weaknesses. Let's go down to number 2. Narrative analysis is such a fun analysis to do. Narrative analysis focuses on how people tell stories to make sense of events. So think about, someone wants to come home and tell you a story about a road rage incident they had. Do they start at the end of the story and say, you won't believe this guy tried to run me off the road. It was the scariest drive of my life. Do they start at the end and highlight what the other driver did? Or do they start right at the beginning of the story where they got into their car and they were slightly flustered because it was a difficult day? And then they weren't really focusing on the road because they were listening to a voice note. And then they flipped the other driver off for whatever reason. And then they got cut off by this other guy. The way we tell stories and what we tell first in a story is very telling about the meaning we make of that story. So that's what you would do in a narrative analysis. You would have a look at the structure of the story and the themes in the story to make some sort of sense about how that person has experienced this phenomenon. So it's often used for autobiographies, interviews, or personal accounts, and helps understand perspectives and worldviews of individuals. The results may be difficult to replicate due to personal narratives. Depends what it is you're trying to do. What kind of research problem are you trying to solve? Then number 3, one of my favorites, and I do these often, is a discourse analysis. And now discourse is language in action. So it can be the words that we speak, but discourse is also about the ideologies underneath the words that we speak. It's about the body language we use. It's about the context in which we use particular language, and styles of language. So it can examine spoken or written language in its social context. Now, discourse analysis is fun because it explores power dynamics, cultural influences, and history as well. And in particular, discourse analysts are interested in understanding how language shapes perceptions and actions. So if we go back to our road rage incident, a discourse analyst would be interested in the words you use. So if I say, this guy just cut me off, that choice of words tells me something as the analyst, as opposed to this guy was driving erratically after I flipped him off. Different choice of language. The way we choose to describe people. Um, Words hold meaning, especially when in particular contexts. So, if you're doing a discourse analysis, it does require deep contextual knowledge and it can be very complex. Um, but for me, one of the most fun types of analysis is a discourse analysis. We have our good old thematic analysis, which is very popular. It is simpler to do than the others and usually can get the job done without going into too much depth about story structure or underlying power narratives underneath this. It's a lot more simpler and to the point. So in thematic analysis, you are identifying themes and patterns in qualitative data. All of these will be identifying themes and patterns, but it's a different way of doing it. Thematic analysis helps us to understand common experiences and viewpoints. Thematic analysis is flexible, which is why it's so popular. It's very widely used for interviews and focus groups and open-ended surveys. Um, Virginia Braun and Victoria Clark are two of the um, seminal authors in thematic analysis, and they have written a lot and done a lot of work in systematizing thematic analysis. And they devised, I mean, it was a long time ago, but they have continued to use the same system. In 2006, they wrote a paper outlining 6 steps for thematic analysis. And that is one that is still very widely used. Okay. Then number 5, grounded theory. Grounded theory is when you are intending to build new theories based on real world data. So you're not trying to apply an existing theory in order to understand the data you have in front of you. You take the data in front of you and you build a theory out of that. So it starts with open-ended questions and then refines through continuous sampling. So you can see this is a very good example of how qualitative data analysis is iterative. Grounded theory is a very good example of that. And it's ideal for research with limited existing literature, but may require extensive data collection and iterations. Also time consuming, but worth it. And then another one we could have a look at is interpretive phenomenological analysis, or IPA for short. And IPA focuses on individual experiences of specific events. Very popular to use in studies on trauma or identity or personal growth. It helps to explore deep subjective perspectives. Usually with RPA, you are using very small sample sizes because it's focused on individual experiences. There's limitations, of course, around using small sample sizes as well. So here's just 6 of the most popular. There's others, but these are some of the most popular ones. How do I choose the right method? How do I know which one is right for my study? You have to choose the one that aligns with your research objectives. Which of these is going to help you to achieve the objectives you have set out as a researcher? You would also need to consider your data type and your research questions. That will guide you as to what it is that would be most relevant for you to use. And that is it for qualitative data collection. If we just scroll back for a moment to the exam question, you'll see that we've covered more than enough here to explain the nature of qualitative data analysis and interpretation. Um, it's mostly this slide and this slide. Okay, but you now know more than what you need to know, so you can provide examples to strengthen your answer. Okay, that is all for this session. I hope that was helpful, and I will see you soon.